Greetings and felicitations. Thanks for joining me for this. Now I have to see if I'm on again and if it's actually working. Yeah, I think it is. All right. Hello. Thanks for joining me. We have an important topic to discuss today. Islamophobia. What is it all about? It's a real word, actually, and it actually has important significance. But of course, as you can tell, it's also being misused. Thanks. It is working. All right. Thanks, Vlad. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Islamophobia and why I want to talk about it today, because, well, Islamophobia is really in the air a lot these days. All right. So first off, what does it mean? What is Islamophobia? What do people mean when they say Islamophobia? All right. Well, we know what Islam is, right? Islam is Islamophobia. Well, we know that too. Phobia means an irrational fear. And so, of course, the word phobia comes from the Greek word phobos, which just means fear. Okay. But in usage, in modern psychological jargon, whenever you say phobia, you mean it's an irrational fear. It has really no basis. It's based on something else, not the thing itself. It's something you should not fear. So, for example, what is it? Arachnophobia is fear of spiders, which is kind of irrational because, I don't fear spiders, honestly. There's other things I do, but or claustrophobia, where it's an irrational fear of tightness. So Islamophobia means just it's an irrational fear. It's not justified. You're the weird one for having these fears of Islam. And lately, it's being used a lot to stifle debate. Shocker. And to demoralize Western peoples. And so, for example, off the top of my head, you may have seen I did a recent stream about the Spanish priest who has been found guilty in a court in Spain and is facing 3 years in prison for Islamophobia. And what exactly did he do? He actually, I think I read to you various quotes and excerpts of what he had written, and it's all plain normal stuff about Islam. It's not flattering, it's not pretty, but it's accurate, it's historical, it's doctrinal. Excuse me. And but it's still enough to get him thrown in jail, all right, because it's Islamophobia, because they're claiming that what he said is based on an irrational fear and he's not being honest. And we saw it again more recently, just this last Monday on Columbus Day. You may have seen I made a video about Muslims adding one more sin to Christopher Columbus's countless and eternal sins that he's accused of recently, and that is Islamophobia. If you saw the Imam Tom, who I quoted, he said, and he stressed that one of the reasons about that Columbus went sailing west is because he hated Muslims. Okay. And it was an irrational hate too. Okay. So this word is being bandied about with great regularity. And so we need to get to the bottom of it. And I think you'll find there's some interesting nuggets of information that we will uncover as we go through this. Now, how do you get to and determine the truth about this question? Well, we're talking about Islam. Islam is a religion. It's an ideology. And to determine exactly how and in what way this ideology, religion, Islam works, we have to look at really three things. Okay. One, the actual teachings of the religion, the doctrines, as captured, of course, in its core texts, the Quran and the Hadith, and in the exegesis of the ulama or the Islamic scholars to make sure that they understand it the way we're reading it. But also more importantly, and for me especially, is I like to see if this doctrine actually does manifest itself in history. Is it just some abstract teaching that people give lip service to, but they don't necessarily engage in, for example? There are a lot of teachings like that probably in all religions. And then finally, current events. Okay, do Muslims today still talk about this doctrine and act on it? These doctrines that we're going to look into. And I think when you look at it this way, if you want to determine anything about any religion, really, not just Islam, if you look at its doctrines, its history, and its current events and its contemporary uses, and especially if you see some kind of continuity going on between the past and the present, I think it's a safe bet to say, yes, that religion does teach X, Y, and Z. Okay? I hope that makes some sense. Anyway, okay, so let's get into it. Now, first is the question, I like to get to the heart of matters whenever confronted with something. And I notice a lot of people often they get lost in the weeds and they start kind of going off and veering off and kind of like getting caught up in peripheral issues. And for me, I like to kind of like, like a hot butter knife, just slice in and get to the heart of what really matters here. And so to that end, I a long time ago determined that the only thing that I care about when it comes to Islam is its inter-civilizational aspects. By inter, I-N-T-E-R, I mean when and how Islam interacts with my civilization and impacts me. I honestly don't care too much about its intra-civilizational aspects, I-N-T-R-A. Okay, intra-civilizational, the second one, means how it works within itself amongst its own members. Okay, so in other words, putting it simply, the difference between this inter-civilizational and intra is basically intra-civilizational is what Muslims do amongst each other and what they believe. Okay, and I know obviously that comes under a lot of criticism. Okay, it's considered draconian, the rules, Sharia, it's patriarchal, it permits polygamy, very early, some would call it child marriage, depending on the age and with various different countries, amputation of the hand for theft. So all of that stuff is intra-civilizational. That just concerns Muslims. And to be frank with you, I just don't care. All right. And it's not that I don't care. What I'm trying to say is these are not enough for me to forcibly want to change Islam. I'm more than happy to tell them, hey, there's a better way to do it. And I think people should and can do that. But I don't think interfering, the traditional white man's burden as it was understood in the 19th century, that, they have to enter and change everyone's ways so they get civilized. I understand the impetus behind it, and it's not necessarily unnoble. I mean, it's a good endeavor, but like I said, I'm being very pragmatic here, and I want to look at what really matters to me and my civilization, my world, my culture, my kin. Okay, and that is the inter-civilizational aspects of Islam. Now, if you've seen, I've actually a long time ago, but I made a video recently, I think, but long time ago, I determined there are 3 aspects that are problematic for the non-Muslim, right? For you and me who are not Islamic. And I basically said it's the hate that Islam teaches for non-Muslims, which manifests itself into the hate I refer to as sort of the metaphysical hostility, which is grounded in the Quran. I think I did a live stream or a video about it recently. And, you have the Quran verses that talk about, you as a Muslim have a good example in Ibrahim, who supposedly, according to the Quranic rendering, Ibrahim being Abraham, the patriarch, he told his kin that I hate you and nothing but hatred will exist between us until you believe in Allah alone. And so based on that, Muslims are called to, and commanded actually, to hate non-Muslims. And and that metaphysical hate manifests itself into what you can consider physical hatred, which is violence and war, which is jihad. And jihad is what I want to look into now. Then the third doctrine, of course, is the aftermath of jihad, which is referred to, if you want to go by the Quranic teaching, jizya, where the subdued infidel has to pay tribute, but also live as a second, if not third class citizen. Okay, but today we're going to look at the most practical of these and how it applies to Islamophobia. And I'm talking, of course, about jihad. Okay, so if you want to get to the bottom of a religion, we're talking about Islam. What did I say? We're going to start off with its doctrines and its teachings. And so we're going to look at the Quran, right? What does the Quran say about jihad, and how does it come off? So I'm going to read to you a few choice verses, which I think speak for themselves. There's a lot, okay, but I'm just going to read to you a few. And okay, so here we go. Quran 9:5, which is known amongst Muslims as the sword verse, Ayat al-Sayf, okay, which is also believed to have abrogated, meaning canceled, something like 124 peaceful verses. Okay, again, according to mainstream Islamic teaching, because it comes later. And that's a whole other thing, abrogation and all that. But anyway, 9:5 says, quote, when the forbidden months are past, fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them. Seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush and stratagem of war. But if they repent, which means accept Islam and become Muslim, and establish regular prayers and practices, etc., open the way for them. Okay? for Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. Okay, so very clear cut. It's saying that, and the forbidden months, this was a pagan thing in Muhammad's time, in pre-Islamic Arabia. There were certain months where peace was suggested. So Muhammad, as usual, appeasing pagan practices, said, okay, let's not do any jihad during this time. But once that passes, there it is. Okay, it's free game, right? Slay the pagans. Okay, and the Arabic word, by the way, is mushrikeen, and this the way you can translate that is the polytheists. It's mean those who associate another idea or person with God, Allah, and generally that's understood to be Christians. Christians are seen as mushrikeen because they believe in a trinity, right? And that's to the Muslim mentality, that means they believe in three different gods, and I think they conflate it and they think one of the three is Mary. Okay, because the Holy Spirit is Muhammad. Anyway, let's not get into that. Let's stay on course. So there's the verse 9:5, very clear cut. Okay, wherever you find infidels, mushrikeen, here it's translated. The one I'm looking at is pagans, which is fair enough. Okay, and the other word that is, I'm saying this because you have different words for infidels in the Quran. Mushrikeen literally is the ones who associate something with Allah, and oftentimes it's also translated as polytheists. So a mushrikeen would be a Hindu, for example, definitely according to Islamic law. The other word kafir, that's the all-encompassing term, and I often translate it as infidel. I understand the limitations of doing that, but the word itself is kind of unintelligible to most Westerners. Kufr means to cover something up, conceal something. So the idea is you heard the message, you heard the da'wah, the call to Islam, but you are covering it up somehow, and you don't want to convert, and you don't want to straighten up, and you don't want others amongst your community to convert either. Therefore, you're an infidel. At any rate, all of these words really come down to what we say or what we call as non-Muslims. All right. So when I say these words, mushrikeen, kafir, polytheist, pagan, infidel, it really is a reference to anyone who rejects Allah, which is in modern parlance, non-Muslims. All right. So now let's continue. That's 9:5. Now here's Quran 9:29, which I often quote. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which Allah has forbidden, which Allah and his prophet have forbidden, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from the people of the book until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves utterly subdued. Now, this is the primary verse that was issued concerning the people of the book, which, according again to Islamic teaching and Islamic exegesis, refers primarily to Christians and Jews, the people who received scriptures before Muhammad came to straighten it out, because they got their scriptures, but then they intentionally plagiarized it and changed it around to make it kind of better for themselves. And so Muhammad came to straighten it and bring it back to its original meaning. Okay, that's the Islamic rendering. But because they're still people of the book, we give them a chance. We don't have to slaughter them like outright pagans. Okay, when we tell them you can pay tribute and live under your religion, but we're going to keep you humiliated, humbled, etc., until you see the light. And meanwhile, you're still paying us. And then finally, you see the light and join the winning team, and you become a Muslim. Okay. And there's so many more verses. I'm going to try to go through these more quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but here's 9:111, 9:11. Allah has purchased of the believers their persons and their goods. For in return, he has granted them the garden, meaning paradise, heaven, with all the ain hor, the huris, the supernatural women. We'll get into that. They, these believers, fight in his cause and slay and are slain, a promise binding on him in truth. Excuse me. Okay, so rejoice in the bargain which you have concluded. That is the ultimate achievement. So this verse, 9:111, is calling on Muslims, saying the greatest Muslims are those who made a deal with Allah, which is, I'm going to give you my life, Allah, and you're going to grant me with the most hedonistic paradise possible. Okay, and this is where the ain hor and these supernatural women who are described in the Quran as being immensely voluptuous and this and that about their eyes and their breasts and their buttocks and whatnot, and how the pleasure and of the coitus is going to be everlasting and something that will make men want to come back and get martyred again so they can get more of it, and so forth. Okay. So as you can see, Allah is tempting the believers to go kill and get killed in exchange for a carnal, hedonistic paradise. This is the Quran. I often find it interesting. A lot of people talk about September 11. They try to say it's because Osama bin Laden is still upset about the siege of Vienna because they think that the final battle where the Christians won was on September 11. It wasn't. It was on September 12th. September 11 actually is the final sort of confrontation in the relief of Malta, actually. But I don't think an Arab like Osama bin Laden would have heroized the Turks so much as he would have Arabs. Anyway, if there's ever any kind of kind of intentional planning, I've always thought that 9/11, September 9/11, was actually based on this verse, which is 9/111, which calls on Muslims to kill and be killed. And that's exactly what happened, isn't it? Moving along, so here's 9:123. O you who believe, fight those of the infidels who are near to you, and let them find harshness in you. And know that Allah is with those who keep their duty, meaning do jihad. 474, Quran 474. Let those fight in the cause of Allah who sell the life of this world for the hereafter. To him who fights in the cause of Allah, whether he is slain or gets victory, soon shall we give him a reward of great value. So here again, we see the same idea, okay? Allah is enticing people to go fight, kill, and die, and I'll hook you up later in heaven, all right? I'll set you up with a bunch of hot chicks. I'm sorry to be so crass, but I mean, this is how one has to read it and understand it in a sort of modern setting. All right. As you can see, I can continue going on, and I will, but all right. So 495. O you who believe, Muslims, shall I show you a commerce that will save you from a painful doom? You should believe in Allah and his messenger, Muhammad, and you should strive, that's the root meaning of jihad, for the cause of Allah, Sabil Allah, with your wealth and your lives. That is better for you if you only knew. Allah has granted a grade higher to those who strive and fight with their goods and persons than those who sit at home and pray. All right. So this one, once again, you can see the same. It's a pretty redundant theme at this point, I think, right? Allah is basically saying that the highest pinnacle of being a Muslim is you go and you fight and you kill and you die. Okay? And that is the highest pinnacle. And those who do that are the truly faithful ones who will get the greatest rewards from God. Okay. All right. Here's Surah 2, verse 216. Quote, fighting is prescribed for you even though you dislike it. But it's possible that you dislike a thing which is good for you and that you love a thing which is bad for you. But Allah knows and you do not. So this is like a parent chastising a little kid, basically saying, hey, you got to go do jihad and kill and die, and you don't get it. You'll understand one day. You're just too young and dumb. Okay, but just listen to me because I'm Allah and I'm telling you. And when you do this, you'll thank me later because you'll get that stuff in paradise. Remember? This is the sort of thing as we're going to see why a lot of non-Muslims kind of couldn't believe that this was a religion to be taken seriously. All right, one last one just for the road. 8:12. I will instill terror into the hearts of the infidels. So smite them above their necks and smite all their fingertips off. Okay. So Allah himself is now part of the jihad. He's going to join in and help, and he's going to, terrorize them, which is why terrorism is a big thing. Muhammad himself said, I was made victorious through terror. And furthermore, the true believers are instructed to behead them and chop off their fingertips for good measure. All right, so that's some Quran verses. Remember, we're trying to understand if Islamophobia, what's the deal? Islamophobia, are fearing Islam. Is it irrational? Okay, is the fear of Islam an irrational thing that some people seem to have or not? Now, I can get into all the jurists because I wanted to. My plan originally was also to, I've read to you the Quran verses, and you may say, or someone may think, well, what do the Muslims think it means, and how do you quote it, and et cetera, et cetera. But rather than do that, I pulled out one of my trusty Arabic manuals. Here's one, Al-Azhar approved, and it's called Al-Tarbiyya Al-Jihadiyya fi Daw Al-Kitab Al-Sunnah, which translates into the jihadist upbringing or education in light of the book, the Quran, and the Sunnah, the Hadith. All right. And it at one point I found a nice summary, a succinct summary of how it translates jihad, and I'm going to read that to you. So after it spends a lot of time, and it's written actually by one Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Nasr al-Jalil, if you want to know. And so after he closely examines the word jihad, he concludes that, quote, jihad is when Muslims wage war on infidels after having called on them to embrace Islam or at least pay tribute, jizya, and live in submission, and then they refuse. And then the book also contains very terse summaries of the word jihad as to how all the four schools of Sunni jurisprudence, al-madhahib, how they understand jihad, which is actually very useful. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, in Islam, in Sunni Islam, even though it's generally agreed upon the main points, you have four different madhab, singular, which are considered like different schools of thought in jurisprudence. They're essentially maybe agreed to, I don't know, 75, 80% of everything. And they have no disagreement, as you'll see, when it comes to jihad, but they, there's different nuances as far as what one should do in this or that circumstance. So off the top of my head, like apostates, some, the more hardcore, will say they have to be killed. Others will say no, and especially if it's a woman, she should only be trapped and beaten and starved, but never kill her. So in other words, they all agree it's awful, it's bad, punishment is required. But, the degree of punishment, there's some difference. But not when it comes to the word of jihad. Okay, so according to the Hanafis, jihad is, quote, extreme and strenuous warfare in the path of Allah with one's life, wealth, and tongue, a call to the true religion, Islam, and war to whoever refuses to accept it. The Hanafis are amongst the most popular school of law, by the way. So what is it saying? Okay, extreme and strenuous warfare in the path of Allah, Sabil Allah. It's sometimes translated the path of Allah, the way of Allah, the road to Allah. But, jihad fi sabilillah means just warfare on behalf of Allah. And what that means is bringing about Islamic Sharia law around the world. Okay. With what? The Hanafis continue, with one's life, wealth, and tongue. Okay, we understand life and wealth, right? We already saw Quran 9:101 about, he who kills and is killed. And tongue, what is that? Well, tongue means essentially you're also striving to bring Muslims to Islam by words, by propaganda, by deceit. Okay, anything that comes out of the mouth and the tongue, a call to the true religion, and war. I'm continuing the quote from the Hanafis, from the Hanafi school of law, and war to whoever refuses to accept it. According to the Malikis, jihad is, quote, when a Muslim fights an infidel so that Allah's word reigns supreme. Okay. According to the Shafi'is, jihad is, quote, fiercely fighting the infidels. And according to the austere Hanbalis, these are the ones that are supposedly the progenitors of what we call Salafis or radicals or Wahhabis, jihad is, quote, fighting infidels. Pretty succinct, right? They don't mince too many words there. And remember what I said, infidels and kuffar and mushrikeen are often more or less or not synonymous. It means the non-Muslim, okay? Now, allow me to have a sip. All right. Now, let's look at the hadith. And the hadith, of course, are the words and deeds and everything that Muhammad did that was recorded, okay? And whether it's a sahih or not, the ones I'm going to read to you are the sahih, meaning Muslims have determined these are the accurate, because there's literally probably millions of hadith, and Muslims themselves have said that, this is fake, or this is a da'if, this is a weak hadith, or this is a strong hadith. But the ones I'm going to read to you about jihad are all considered authentic. They come from Sahih Bukhari, the number one hadith collector, and a close second, Sahih Muslim. Okay, and so let me read to you a few of them. Actually, one of the most, I've always thought, one of the most important, because it's so methodical and straightforward hadith, and it just describes what jihad really is recorded in Sahih Muslim, and it's in his book of jihad, chapter 2, number 4294. Okay, and it says that Muhammad, quote, it says that when the messenger of Allah, Muhammad, quote, appointed anyone as leader of an army or detachment, he would especially exhort him to fear Allah and to be good to the Muslims who were with him. Then he would say, fight in the name of Allah and in the way of Allah. Fight against those who disbelieve in Allah. When you meet your enemies who are polytheists, you see how the words keep merging because they all mean the same thing, non-believers. When you meet your enemies who are polytheists, invite them to 3 courses of action. If they respond to any one of these, you also accept it and withhold yourself from doing them any harm. First, invite them to accept Islam. If they respond to you, accept it from them and desist from fighting against them. Okay. And then second, if they refuse to accept Islam, demand from them the jizya, which is tribute, money. If they agree to pay, accept it from them and hold off your hands. If they refuse to pay the tax, seek Allah's help and fight them. So there it is. I mean, does it get any more clear-cut than that, honestly? There it is. According to Muslim belief, here's Muhammad in a canonical hadith in Sahih Muslim telling Muslims how it is, okay, which conforms very much with those earlier verses we read, such as Quran 9:29, which says, fight the people of the book until they either pay jizya, okay, and feel themselves, fight the people of the book until they become Muslim, or pay jizya and feel themselves subdued, or fight to the end. So here you have a canonical hadith, which in more detail, more or less, fleshes out that exact stratagem and that exact phenomena. Where else is it even worth going with more? Okay, so here's some other more hadith. I heard Allah's apostle, this is Sahih Bukhari, say the example of a mujahid in Allah's cause. A mujahid is one who does jihad, what we would call a jihadi or jihadist. In Arabic, it's a mujahid, one who does jihad. So the example of a mujahid, and Allah knows better who really strives in his cause, is like a person who fasts and prays continuously. This is Muhammad talking. Allah guarantees that he will admit the mujahid in his cause into paradise if he is killed. Otherwise, he will return him to his home safely with rewards and war booty. And here we get the classic, what I call the win-win scenario of Islam, which propelled and incited Muslim jihadis to no end. What did Muhammad just say here? He basically said, first of all, that no one is better than the mujahid, the jihadist, okay? He's better than the person who stands praying and fasting for eternity, which cannot be done, all right? And better than that, Allah guarantees that he will admit him into his paradise if he is killed. But if he's not killed, he will return to his home safely with rewards and war booty. Win-win. Okay, so if you are the jihadist and you're set loose and you go and you attack and try to destroy the infidels and you end up dying, well, you're gonna go. Well, actually, let's start it off without you dying. Let's say you go, you're a jihadist, you're a mujahid, you're in Sabilillah, you attack the infidels and you don't die. Well, guess what you're gonna get? You're gonna get war booty, which includes women, children, concubines. You're going to get property and you're going to live good, right? You're going to enjoy yourself with the wealth and the persons of the infidel. But even if you die, Allah will give you all that in heaven. So it's a win-win scenario. Okay, you go for it. You try to get it in the now, and you try to conquer the infidels and enjoy their possessions and their women. And but if you die, don't worry, because I'll hook you up in paradise with an even higher quality of possessions and bliss and women, such as the Ain Hor, supernatural celestial women, whom Allah creates for the express purpose of the martyrs' carnal gratification in perpetuity. All right. So there's another one. I'll just read it to you because it really confirms this idea. And again, from Sahih Bukhari, Allah, the Prophet said, quote, "A single endeavor of fighting in Allah's cause is better than all the world and whatever is in it." So just doing jihad and fighting and killing is better than the entire world and everything in it. That's how important jihad is and central to Islam, according to a canonical hadith in the highest, most authoritative hadith collection of Sahih Bukhari. Muhammad continues, "A place in paradise as small as the bow or lash of one of you is better than all the world and whatever is in it. And if a huri," these supernatural women, "from paradise appeared to the people of the earth, she would fill the space between heaven and the earth with light and pleasant scent. And her head cover is better than the world and whatever is in it." So once again, more enticement for the jihadist to go and blow himself up in modern day manifestations, in order so he can just get these super hot chicks in heaven and have a great old time. And I know this is, I'm coming off very facetious, but this is really how it must register in anyone's brain once you move beyond the sort of hagiographical veneer that kind of encompasses these words. That's all this is. This is carnal enticement telling you, hey, go to war now and you're going to get what you want and you're going to enjoy it. And if you don't, hey, you'll get it when you die. Win-win scenario, like I said. I think I'll stop it there with the hadith. All right, that's enough of that. And so again, all of this is to give you examples of jihad in the Quran, in the hadith, to see if this is a real thing or are we just being Islamophobes. And there you go. So we have it in the Quran, we have it in hadith, pretty clear cut. I read to you a quote from the Arabic summary of what the Islamic schools of thought about all that. And now finally, I will give you a nice little quote from what's called the Encyclopedia of Islam. And this was a very useful and good encyclopedia. It's I think it was British, and it was originally compiled. I'll tell you my history though, but I think it was like 12 volumes, very thick books, and in the early 1900s it was compiled. And I had regular access to this original first edition when I worked at the Library of Congress. They were actually right there in the reading room I was at, and I often consulted it. But since then, we still have the Encyclopedia of Islam, but I believe you can only get a the sort of modern version, which has been watered down and edited and completely changed to conform to the idea that Islam is a religion of peace, etc., etc. But I'm going to read to you, because I copied it down way back at the Library of Congress from the Encyclopedia of Islam, the jihad entry that was in the original first edition, written by Emil Tian, who was actually, I believe, a Lebanese or Syrian jurist, okay, PhD, but a jurist in Islamic law. And he wrote the following. So this is now the final short summation, succinct expression of what jihad is. Quote, "The spread of Islam by arms is a religious duty upon Muslims in general. Jihad must continue to be done until the whole world is under the rule of Islam. The duty of jihad exists as long as the universal domination of Islam has not been attained. Peace with non-Muslim nations is therefore a provisional state of affairs only. The chance of circumstances alone can justify it temporarily. Islam must completely be made over before the doctrine of jihad can be eliminated." And there you have it. So to just kind of like elaborate what I just read to you, he's basically saying, so jihad is what I've been telling you it is, and it's a religious duty upon Muslims in general. This is in Arabic. It's called, as opposed to a fard ain, which means an individual duty that I have to do, like fasting and praying. This is a fard kifaya, which means as long as a portion of the Islamic ummah is engaged in jihad, the rest are exonerated, and there's no sin being committed, except when it's in defense. So if it's a defensive jihad, then it becomes a fard ain. But the general jihad, which is you go and you conquer in the name of Islam and etc., it has to be done by at least a group of committed jihadists, or else the entire ummah is sinning. And it must be done until the whole world is under the rule of Islam. Again, I'm reading from the Encyclopedia of Islam. The duty of jihad exists as long as the universal domination of Islam has not been attained. So this jihad must continue until Islamic Sharia law governs the whole world. There's no way around it. Okay, and here again is a quote: the Islam must completely be made over before the doctrine of jihad can be eliminated. In other words, you have to get in a whole new religion if you want to get rid of jihad, because that is how central it is to the religion of Islam. And again, note this quote: peace with non-Muslim nations is therefore a provisional state of affairs only. The chance of circumstances alone can justify it temporarily. In other words, peace with non-Muslims is all about circumstances. I'm a Muslim nation. I'm weak at this time. And the infidels are powerful. Yeah, we can have peace. More than happy. Let's be friends. But when the time comes that Muslim nation is now strong and can go on the offensive, and the neighbors or the infidels that it had an alliance with are now weaker, okay, time for jihad. And in fact, that is the history of Muhammad himself. If you're familiar with the unfolding or the revelation of the Quran, you must know, of course, that there's two phases. There's the Mecca phase and the Medina phase. The Mecca phase is where you get all those nice, tolerant, open-minded Quran verses about you have your religion, I have mine, and there's no compulsion in religion, etc. Because guess what? Muhammad was weak and outnumbered, and he was actually living under the rule of pagans who, if he actually got a little uppity, might have killed him. But then when he went to Medina and became essentially a warlord and went on the offensive and he was strong, all those verses started changing. And that's where you get the ones I read to you. The sword verses about fight the people of the book until they pay tribute, 929, and the other one, 9:5, which is when the forbidden months are past, then fight and attack and kill and enslave the mushrikeen wherever you find them. Okay, that was the final word, because that's what Muhammad died. He was strong. He was conquering. He had essentially almost conquered the whole of Arabia. So the latest verses are all the violent ones. And anyway, there it is. So, all right. So we've moved on. We've covered the doctrinal portion of Islam, and I think it's very safe to say at this point that, jihad is indeed a central component of Islam. Okay. And jihad being what I just described, which is unprovoked warfare. It's not just war. I remember so many times, maybe 15 years ago, under the Obama administration, all these officials would issue, documents and whatever from the State Department talking about how jihad is just synonymous with just war. It's just the Islamic version of just war theory. Yeah, I don't think so. Okay. So now okay, based on the books alone, and we're going to look, did this really happen? Maybe they didn't follow it. Maybe, there were caveats. Maybe this was just an abstract theory that Muslims parked and never really dealt with. But we can, I think, safely say that it's in the books. It's in the Quran. It's in the Hadith. And I've quoted to you from Muslim exegetes and the ulama, the scholars. And I've quoted to you from Western sources before they were corrupted and became woke and politically correct, and as they are now, constant liars. And I'm referring, of course, to the Encyclopedia of Islam quote that I just read to you. So now, one moment. Let's see if this in fact manifested itself in reality, historically. Okay. Do everything I just read to you, all those quotes, did they in fact inform Muslim actions historically? Well, okay, the short answer is yes, of course they did. And if you're familiar with any of my books, especially Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West, or Defenders of the West, or the new book, The Two Swords of Christ, you're going to see Muslims repeatedly and habitually acting upon those same teachings and verses in the Quran and the Hadith. And these are not just random Muslims, lone wolves, or terrorists. These were usually the chief representatives of Islam. They were the heads of state. They were the caliphs. They were the sultans and so forth. And they had a whole school of ulama and scholars and sheikhs and muftis following them around, quoting what I just read to you to justify the unprovoked assaults and attacks and conquests of non-Muslim regions. Okay. One that I really hope to talk about, and I'll just get it out of the way real quick, just because it came to my attention. I've known this for a while, but I need to really mention it. And it was in the context of the Christopher Columbus video I made, and how Muslims are complaining that Christopher Columbus is this horrible man who engaged in genocide. Well, not many people seem to know that just between the year 1000 and 1525, okay, according to a well-known and authoritative historian, K.S. Lal, in his book, Growth of Muslim Population in Medieval India, so between the year 1000 and 1525, as many as 80 million Hindus were slaughtered by Muslim invaders in the name of Islam. Okay, think about that. And remember what I told you. See, the people of the book are the lucky ones, right? Quran 9:29 says, fight them, but then you can accept jizya, where they pay tribute, and you just leave them alone as long as they live as second-class citizens. But initially, this does not apply to the polytheists, okay, the mushrikeen, like the Hindus. So, from a strict reading, Hindus had two choices. You either convert or you die. And there's no paying tribute, no living as a second-class citizen. And so that kind of helps explain why 80 million of them were massacred in 5 centuries. Okay. So again, I'm telling you this to see to what extent does history actually conform to doctrine. But now let's talk a little bit more about what I really know a lot about, and which is possibly more relevant to most viewers because it involves the West. And that is, of course, Islam's spread, that is conquest of Western territory. And of course, today we call it the West, and it's kind of it's a word I'm not too fond of. If I have a lot of bones to pick with words that we use rather carelessly, and West is one of them. If I look around the world, I see lots of civilizations that are named as civilizations. There's the Islamic world, there's the Buddhist world, Indian civilization, Hindu civilization, and then there's a direction, the West. Well, okay, so that used to be Christendom, right? And I think that's important to know. Now it's just a direction from. It doesn't even have its own identity. It identifies itself as its directional proximity from other civilizations. Anyway, that's a tangent. So let's talk about how Islam conquered Christendom, aka the West, right? So again, just a brief summary from the year 632 when Muhammad died to 732. All of North Africa, all of the Middle East, and Spain were conquered. And that whole section I just told you was the main portion of Christendom. That was where most Christians lived. That was the larger portion of Christendom. Again, most people don't know this for obvious reasons. You're not supposed to know that. You're supposed to think that MENA, Middle East, North Africa, was always somehow Islamic. No, actually Syria and what we call today the modern names Israel or Palestinian territories, Jordan, even portions of Iraq, Lebanon, all of that being part of greater Syria was primarily Christian. All of Egypt was overwhelmingly Christian, all the way throughout North Africa. Augustine, the sort of spiritual father of Western theology, was from North Africa. Hippo, which is, I believe, in Tunisia or Algeria. Okay, and all of that was conquered and stripped and taken through. Described for you, jihad fi sabilillah. It was taken. Okay, and Spain as well, which was also, of course, Christian. And I often like to give the year 632 to 732 because that's one exact century from the death of Muhammad until you have now Muslims in the middle of France, and 732 being the Battle of Tours, of course, which the anniversary just passed about a week ago. I did a little video about it. You should watch it. October 10th being the anniversary. So all that was conquered, Spain, etc. And then later, of course, and according to other historians, if you look at the map, it's something like 3/4 of the Christian world was permanently conquered. And then even more later on, you get Asia Minor, what we call today Turkey, which was, again, one of the oldest Christian regions. It's where St. Paul wrote so many letters, and John, and, the churches of Revelation are all in that region. That, of course, was Islamized later by the Turks, hence Turkey. And then the Balkans were invaded by the Turks and Russia. People seem to forget that the Tatar yoke, they seem to know that, Mongols invaded and ruled Russia for centuries. And, they mistake the fact that when they did conquer Russia, the Mongols were not Muslims. But very early on, after their conquest, they became Muslims, the Golden Horde. And so most of the relations between Russia, Christian Russia, Orthodox Russia, and the Tatars was that same old paradigm of Christian Muslim, okay, because the Tatars were Muslim. And I discussed it in my book, in Sword and Scimitar. You'll see the same patterns that Muslims inflict on Christian subjects, evident between the Muslim Tatars and the Christian Russians as well. Okay, so that goes on, and then you have these horrific slave raids that come out in the sources during these times in the Balkans, in the Crimea. So the Golden Horde in Crimea, they had this slave trade of white flesh, which was the Slavs, Russians, of course, the peoples of the Balkans. And, according to the sources, I want to eventually, methodically break down the numbers, but I did a bit of that in Sword and Scimitar, and I think I put endnotes, but it's in the many millions, okay, just in like a couple of centuries. And, the Turks themselves, there's all these random attacks on this or that Balkan region, and then they come back with, 50,000 slaves in that day and 100,000 on that day, and so forth. So this was an ongoing thing. And, and of course, most importantly is Barbary, North Africa, which was also Muslim, and its entire economy consisted of enslaving Europeans. It consisted entirely of pirates going in the Mediterranean, most of the European Mediterranean, and enslaving Europeans. And the areas that were especially devastated were Spain, Italy, southern France. But they went as far as Iceland. Okay, we have records of this. In England, there was a little, they're still there. It's called Lundian Island. And Muslims from North Africa actually took over that island and used it as a base. Excuse me. And used it as a base to launch slave raids into England. All right, for years. Of course, now they're in England doing the same sorts of things, the grooming and whatnot, but that's by invitation. Okay, so that's a little different. But then, so this mass slavery that went on and on and on even reached America. Okay, once, after the Revolutionary War, once America broke free from Britain, most people don't know this, but Britain, Britain and a lot of other European countries, to deal with these Barbary Muslim pirates, they paid them off. They said, okay, you know what? Instead of attacking our ships and attacking our coastlines and raiding and killing, we're going to pay you essentially jizya. I mean, I don't know if the Europeans understood that's what it meant, but the Muslims accepted it. You're paying us tribute. We're going to leave you alone because you're a Christian, right? You're people of the book. So this, of course, conformed to Quran 929. But when after the Revolutionary War ended, Muslims learned that America is no longer under the protection of Great Britain. Okay, and Great Britain was paying jizya. So they immediately attacked American vessels. All right, and the first, I believe, is in 1785. And it was the Maria and the Dauphin. And the Muslims enslaved these American sailors and took them to North Africa, where they were no doubt, exposed to all the horrific sorts of torture that European Christian slaves experienced in North Africa, which includes, sadistic torture, pressuring them to convert, sodomy, turning them into male sex slaves. And this is copiously documented in the writings of missionaries and redeemers, as they were known. From people like John Fox, Father Dan, Father Jerome Morand, Robert Playfair. You can see I write a lot about it and document it in Sword and Scimitar in chapter 8, I think. The final chapter. Anyway, so based on that, when one of the ship's captains, the Dolphins, Captain O'Brien, wrote to Thomas Jefferson saying that, quote, our sufferings are beyond our expression or your imagination, he wasn't exaggerating. So now Jefferson and Jefferson and John Adams, who were at that time ambassadors to France and England, respectively, decided to meet with Tripoli's ambassador to Britain, Abdul Rahman Aja, okay, in an effort to try to ransom the enslaved Americans and somehow establish peaceful relations with the Muslims of North Africa. So then Jefferson actually laid out what transpired at this meeting. In a letter to Congress, which was dated March 28, 1786, they wrote, Jefferson and with Adams, of course, they wrote a letter that laid out the source of Barbary's unprovoked animosity. So here's what they wrote, quote, we took the liberty to make some inquiries concerning the grounds of their pretensions to make war upon nations who had done them no injury, and observed that we considered all mankind as our friends, who had done us no wrong, nor had given us any provocation. The ambassador answered us that it was, quote, it doesn't say quote, but I assume that's what Jefferson meant. So let me continue. The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran, that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, meaning those who do not submit to them or become Muslim, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found. Sound familiar? And to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners. And that every Muslim, he writes, who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. Now, isn't that a wonderful way to recap this final sort of historical take? Because it goes right back to what we started with. I started by reading I said, let's look at the doctrine, and I started with the sword verse, Quran 9:5. Jefferson unknowingly it basically paraphrased what this Muslim man, the Tripoli's ambassador Abdul Rahman, what he was saying is he was quoting Quran 9:5. Okay, because look what it says. He told them that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in the Quran, that all nations should be acknowledge them, or they were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could and take as prisoners. That's Quran 9:5. Okay. When the forbidden months are past, lay in wait, in ambush, and wherever you can find the polytheists, attack them, kill them, and make slaves of them. That's what's going on here. And the end of that little excerpt that Jefferson Adams wrote, and that every Muslim or Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. Well, yeah, we just saw that, didn't we, in the Quran and in the Hadith. You know, Allah has purchased the lives of the believers. They fight, they die, they kill and are killed, and then they get paradise. Okay, Quran 9, 111. All right. So there you go. There's we looked at the doctrine. We've looked at the history, and obviously the history does indeed match the doctrine, right? To a T. In fact, that last quote I just read to you about what Jefferson said with the meeting with the Barbary ambassador. I mean, that's it right there, right? We've just gone about 12 centuries from Muhammad's time, and here you have an ambassador justifying why he's attacking a newborn United States by quoting Quran 9:5, which tells not Muslims that, hey, when the forbidden months, etc., you should attack, you can kill, you can enslave the non-Muslim until such time that they establish prayer, etc., meaning until such time they become Muslim, because Allah is oft forgiving and wise and merciful. Okay, so there it is. Now, little bonus historical section is, let's now look at how Europeans historically, so the first part of the history we looked at, actually the history. Now let's look at that kind of same history, but how Europeans understood it. Did they understand this is about a religion and a prophet and something about jihad, or was this just random war like any other kind of war that they had to deal with? Well, in fact, and as we're going to see, everything they wrote is what would today be, would trigger the leftist as Islamophobic and horrible. All right. And there's a reason for that. So let's do a quick run. Again, I'm going to do this chronologically, and I'm trying to move fast, and then I'm going to start taking some chats and answering them. All right. So the first one, 2 years after Muhammad dies, the Doctrine Jacobi. Okay, and this is just 2 years after Muhammad dies, 634, and it documents a dialogue that took place, like I said, 2 years after Muhammad's death. And one of the participants in this dialogue, parched throat. One of the participants in this dialogue, his name is Justice. And he says that his brother Abraham, quote, wrote to me saying that a deceiving prophet has appeared amidst the Saracens. Saracens means Arabs. And then Justice says that Abraham, his brother, who was living near Arabia, went and spoke to an old Jewish scribe. And then he continues, quote, what do you tell me, Lord and teacher, concerning the prophet who has appeared among the Saracens? Is what Abraham asked the elderly Jew. And the scribe told me with much groaning, he is deceiving. For do prophets come with swords and chariot? Verily, these events of today are works of confusion. So afterward, Abraham decided to investigate the matter personally. And he writes, quote, so I, Abraham, inquired and heard from those who had met him, Muhammad, that there was no truth to be found in this so-called prophet, only the shedding of men's blood. He also says that he has the keys of paradise, which is incredible. Doesn't this very much conform with what we've seen with the Quran and the Hadith? How Allah and Muhammad, his messenger, are promising paradise to those who fight and bloodshed and kill. And here it is, 2 years after Muhammad, and you have people already saying this guy's a false prophet. Okay? One of the earliest, in my opinion, 2 years after Muhammad's death, Islamophobic statement. And then you have John of Damascus, who was born in 675. Okay, this man is born about, 40 years after Muhammad died. Very, very early testimony. Now, you can go read his entire thing. It's in his book, which is called On Heresies, and he refers to this as the Ishmaelite heresy. But the summary of what he says, it's all very negative and it's all very Islamophobic. He says that Muhammad was a false prophet, that he fabricated his revelations, that he was a forerunner of Antichrist, that he was a man of lust and deceit who justified his own immorality with divine sanction, that he was a plagiarist, which is ironic because he distorted the Bible. In other words, he took the Bible, changed it around, and created the Quran. And then he said the Bible is the false one and the Quran is the correct one. And that he also presents him that he was a leader of an idolatrous cult that masquerades as a monotheistic religion. All right. Now, here's another little known one. Emperor Leo the Isaurian, who, if you read in Sword and Scimitar, my book, in chapter 2, he features prominently because we're talking about the siege of Constantinople, and he was the heroic defender of it around the year 717, 718. After that siege, and again, Constantinople prevailed, the Muslims lost. Caliph Omar II, a year later, called on him to embrace Islam, basically saying, all right, look, we're not going to attack you anymore, just become a Muslim. And this led to a very frank exchange in letters. Now, let me read to you some of what Leo wrote. Okay, this is interfaith dialogue in the old days, the way it should be. It was honest, actually. Leo wrote the following, quote, I do not wish to pass over in silence the abominable authorization given you, Muslims, by your legislator, Muhammad, to have with your wives a commerce that he has compared, I am ashamed to say, to the tilling of fields. And he's referring to Quran, Surah 2, verse 223, where women are referred to as tilling the fields. He continues, as a consequence of this license, a goodly number of you have contracted the habit of multiplying their commerce, sex, with women. In other words, you've multiplied the frequency of carnal relations with random women, as if it were a question of tilling fields. Nor can I forget the chastity of your prophet and the manner full of artifice whereby he succeeded in seducing the woman Zainab. He's referring to the well-documented story where Muhammad, his adopted son, Zayd, he's coming to visit him and he's not there, but he sees his wife Zainab half naked. He develops the hots for her. And long story short, he gets a revelation saying, hey, you can have her after all. And this bans adoption because he's not your son. He had adopted supposedly Zayd. But so the problem is he couldn't have Zainab because she's his daughter-in-law. But if Zayd is no longer his son, then he can have her. So all of a sudden now adoption, as it is still, is banned. Technically, is banned in Islam. Also, Muhammad could have Zainab. Leo continues, quote, of all these abominations, the worst is that of accusing God of being the originator of these filthy acts, which fact has doubtless been the cause of the introduction among your compatriots of this disgusting law, treating women as tilling fields. Is there indeed a worse blasphemy than that of alleging that God is the cause of all this evil? Again, I'm reading it. It's straight from my book, Sword and Scimitar, on page 63. A very telling and very little known dialogue between Emperor Leo, the Isaurian, Leo III, and Caliph Omar II. All right, moving along. Now, here's Theophanes. This is an important chronicler who I first came across in college many, many moons ago, and I actually translated this little bit, which I'm going to read to you. So he was born in 758, and after encountering and studying and Islam and looking at the Quran, he concluded that, quote, he, Muhammad, taught those who gave ear to him that the one slaying the enemy or being slain by the enemy entered into paradise. That, of course, is Quran 9111, which I just read to you. And he said paradise was carnal and sensual, orgies of eating, drinking, and women. Also, there was a river of wine, and the women were of another sort. He means the huris, these supernatural women. And the duration of sex greatly prolonged, and its pleasure long enduring, and all sorts of other nonsense. Okay. Very Islamophobic and very early on. Now, here's Thomas Aquinas. Now, this being one of Christendom's, especially Western Europe or the West in general's most influential philosophical theologians, who died around 1274. He wrote, quote, he, Muhammad, seduced the people by promises of carnal pleasures, to which the concupiscence of the flesh urges us on, and he gave free rein to carnal pleasure. In all this, as is not unexpected, he was obeyed by carnal men. As for proofs of the truth of his doctrine, Muhammad said that he was sent in the power of his arms, which are signs not lacking even to robbers and tyrants. In other words, Muhammad's proof that God was with him is that he was able to conquer and plunder others, which Thomas is saying, yeah, your typical thief does that too. And he continues, Muhammad forced others to become his followers by the violence of his arms. Okay. You know, there's so many of these. I actually just called them all directly from Sword and Scimitar, but I'm just going to give you a few more. Here's a very interesting one. Marco Polo, the world traveler, the Italian merchant and world traveler who died in 1324. Okay, so he wrote, he went to the East when it was still being ruled by the Mongols, and a lot of Muslims were under Mongol rule, and the Mongols at this time were where he went. They were not Muslim. And so he, when he went there, Marco Polo, in his memoirs, wrote the following, quote, according to their doctrine, he's talking about Muslims, whatever is stolen or plundered from others of a different faith is properly taken, and the theft is no crime, while those who suffer death or injury by the hands of Christians are considered as martyrs. So here, and now keep in mind, a guy like Marco Polo, this is not an Islamophobe. This isn't a man who read a book, published to defame Islam. This is just a regular man who's out there and he's learning things, and he's coming across these different strange people. He's far, far away from Italy. He's like in Central Asia or even East Asia now. And he's learning and he's finding out, according to their doctrine, anything these people, Muslims, steal or plunder from those of another faith is taken legitimately. And the theft is no crime. And those who die or are injured are martyrs. Doesn't this once again, completely accord with what we've seen from the doctrinal teachings of Islam? And then he goes on to write, quote, if therefore they were not prohibited and restrained by the powers that be, meaning the Mongols, who now govern them, they would commit many outrages. These principles are common to all Saracens. So he's basically saying, if it wasn't for the fact that these pagan Mongols are keeping the Muslims in check, so Christians and others can come and visit and do commerce, they would be pillaging and killing and destroying and enslaving the Christians and every non-Muslim. They would commit many outrages, he writes. And then he writes, these principles are common to all Saracens. So he's basically saying this isn't just this local group that was that I came across under the Khanate. It's just something amongst Saracens. It's part of their creed. All right. And then there's an interesting anecdote. Marco Polo writes that when the Mongol Khan that he was working for later discovered the depraved criminality of the name is written as Ahmad, which I assume it's Ahmed, one of his Muslim governors. When the Khan found out that Ahmed was engaged in some sort of depraved criminality, Polo writes that the Khan's, quote, attention went to the doctrines of the sect of the Saracens, meaning Islam, which excuse every crime, yea, even murder itself, when committed on such as are not of their religion. And seeing that this doctrine had led the accursed Ahmed and his sons to act as they did without any sense of guilt, the Khan was led to entertain the greatest disgust and abomination for Islam. So he summoned the Saracens and prohibited their doing many things which their religion enjoyed. Now, isn't that very telling? See, to me, this is gold right here. This, to me, I find is so much more revealing than, so much commentary written about Islam. And I'll explain. Hang on. Again, to emphasize, Marco Polo, this is not a shill. This isn't some guy who has an agenda. Okay. This is just a regular merchant, Italian guy who, is entering into a whole new world and experiencing all new things and peoples and cultures. And he probably knows very little about Muslims, but he's learning a lot, right? And he's finding out, and he's giving you another example now. And he says that even the Mongol, okay, who's at this point a pagan, found out how these Saracens are acting, and then his attention went to the doctrines of the sect of the Saracens, okay? And then he realized that they excuse every crime, even murder itself, as long as it's committed on those who are not of their religion, infidels. And then seeing that this doctrine had led the accursed Ahmed and his sons to act as they did without any sense or guilt, the Khan was led to entertain the greatest disgust and abomination for it. Good for you, Khan. Okay. And, so there is some truth to this idea that, pagans and polytheists and Mongols, who were essentially savages, were actually a little more elevated in their understanding of human relations than Muslims at this point. Okay, and so the Khan summoned the Saracens and prohibited their doing many things which their religion enjoined. All right, now there's another, Marco Polo makes another kind of interesting point, I think. Up until now, as you listen to me, a lot of people may argue and say, so what? You're quoting all these Christians and Europeans who are talking badly about Islam. Well, shocker. I mean, that's how everyone was in the pre-modern era. All these backward Christians, they hated everyone who wasn't a Christian, and they would have nothing good to say about them. But for starters, you're already seeing Marco Polo speak well about the Mongols, and there's other places in his book and his memoirs where he actually praises their character. We've already seen he's doing it here because the Khan himself was disgusted when he learned that Muslims have like a double standard, that, I can kill and cheat and do whatever to the non-Muslim. He himself didn't like that, okay? But Marco Polo himself, in his writings, okay, he hailed the Brahmins of India, and he called them, quote, most honorable. And he said they possessed a, quote, hatred for cheating or taking the goods of other persons, okay? So here you have the same Marco Polo who's saying what he's saying about Islam, but when it came to other people, these Brahmins of India who are not Christians, okay, he dealt with them, and he realized they are most honorable, and that they have a hatred for cheating or taking the goods of other persons. So again, to emphasize, I tell you that because it's one of the easy sort of canards or responses to what I'm doing right now, reading to you all these quotes, is to say, big deal. Marco Polo and all these early Christians were just xenophobes and didn't like anyone, and they're gonna portray them in the worst light possible. But here, no, they're not. Okay. Here he is speaking well of the Brahmins of India who are not Christians, speaking well of the Mongols. So there was something specific about Muslims, right? And I like this too. Despite his criticisms of the sect of the Saracens, meaning Islam, occasionally he refers to Muslims in a good way, individuals. So he referred to one Muslim leader as governing with justice, quote unquote, and another one who, quote, showed himself to be a very good Lord and made himself beloved by everybody. So again, you see the fairness of Marco Polo, but more importantly, you also see, this sheds light on a current day phenomena, the whole moderate radical Muslim thing, right? So yeah, he tells you the sect of the Saracens, Islam teaches X, Y, and Z, all these negative things that the Khan himself found this out and was really disgusted about it and banned them. But there are Muslims who actually were good people. And why is that? Is it because they were practicing a moderate form of Islam? No, it's because they were not really practicing Islam per se. Okay, they were, and that's the whole point that I always try to make. Moderates and radicals do exist, but the moderates are not the ones who follow real Islam, and the radicals have hijacked it, as it's told to us. The radicals are the ones who follow real Islam, and the moderates, good as they are not following it. And so even innocent Marco Polo, not knowing all the intricate teachings of Islam, even he was able to make that distinction and realize there are the moderates and the radicals. And it reminds me of British statesman Winston Churchill, moving forward now, who in his writings likened religiosity in Muslims to rabies in dogs. He summed up the matter in a very similar way as Marco Polo, or what I'm trying to tell you now. He wrote, quote, individual Muslims may show splendid qualities, but the influence of the religion paralyzes the social development of those who follow it. No stronger retrograde force exists in the world. All right. So what is he saying? Yeah, you can find Muslims who act well and you like them and they're decent, good people. But the religion itself, okay, if practiced, there's no stronger retrograde force in the world. Okay. There's so many more. Now, this was just sent to me, and I'll give you the source, but Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada. Now, this was the Archbishop of Spain. We're going back a little bit now before Marco Polo, who was born in 1170. Okay. And, he wrote a very important a book, which is called his Minor History. So he was a historian and an archbishop. And he wrote, now here's a few, just disparate sort of observations that he made that very much comport with what we're talking about. He wrote of the, quote, cunning man Muhammad and his fake revelation, which devised a pestilence bearing poison from his heart, by which he bound lustful souls in coils. All right. And he wrote, quote, with the passage of time, Muhammad accumulated so many women such that he was corrupted by lust, or rather adultery. He writes this about the Quran, quote, in this book, he, Muhammad, approached so many disgraceful surahs that it would be shameful to mention them, let alone follow up on them. A lot of Christians actually, by the way, felt that way. I already quoted to you Leo, the Isurian, Leo III, making a very similar kind of observation that this is too shameful to even talk about. And in fact, a little interesting fun fact is when you read earlier, the writings of Orientalists, which I like, from the 19th century, and they really get into these dark and shady aspects of Islam, they don't translate it into English, even if they're writing in English, let's say, or French or whatever. They actually leave it in the original Latin. So if they're quoting Rodrigo, for example, and the idea is, this is so scandalous, I don't even want to put it in English. You need to know Latin, which, of course, many people in the 19th century, if they're academics and scholars, did. But in other words, it was a way of hiding it from the lay people, okay, the disgrace and depravities of the Quran. They just wouldn't want to put it up straight. I remember that especially in a book written by Norman Daniel, which is a very good book, about what non-Muslims said about Islam. And oftentimes when it would get to the really graphic stuff, he would just leave it in Latin. So here again is Rodrigo, Archbishop Rodrigo, on how Muhammad received his revelations. Quote, in the 40th year of his life, Muhammad rather frequently stayed in Mecca, and he lyingly claims that all these aforementioned things, the visions of the Isra and the Miraj and so forth, and many other ridiculous and wicked things were said to him there by the angel Gabriel, with his aim being to bind the peoples he had incited to rebellion with his sex cords of death. Okay. And by the way, this is all a fresh translation from Ayman Jawad al-Tamimi that he actually just sent them to me on request from me. And it's from a new book that's coming out, being published by Manchester University Press in January 2026, under the title Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada's Minor Histories, okay, which I personally look forward to looking into because I'm very familiar with the writings of the Archbishop Rodrigo. He was actually at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, the pivotal battle, the most decisive battle that reconquered Spain back to the Spaniards, to the Christians during the Reconquista. So a very insightful man. All right, I'm going to give you one last one, and then we're going to end this. Emperor Manuel, okay, Manuel II Comnenus, I believe, who lived, I think, he lived around 1350 to 1425. So a couple of a generation or two before the fall of Constantinople in 1453. And I'm talking about Manuel II, Paleologos, ancient word is what his name means. And this is the guy, if you don't know who I'm talking about, he made the news back in, 2000 something, when Pope Benedict, remember when Pope Benedict got in a lot of trouble and upset a lot of Muslims? It's because he quoted Manuel. And here's the quote. Manuel said, quote, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you will find things only evil and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword the faith that he preached." So Pope Benedict mentioned that in an actual it was actually a closed door sort of speech that he gave. And he was actually making a grander point, which I think is very important. But as you can see, here's Manuel saying, what did Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, do or bring other than bring new evil and inhuman teachings, such as jihad, the command to spread by the sword the faith he preached, as he said. Okay. And, Emperor Emmanuel is more important for another reason. He speaks about, he said this as follows, and this is actually when he was a hostage of the Ottoman Turks, and he would debate them about religion. And he said that, after he said this business about, what did Muhammad bring that wasn't evil or inhuman, he only brought the command to spread by the sword his faith. He said that this is what Islam requires of non-Muslims. He wrote, quote, 1, they must place themselves under his law, meaning Sharia, meaning become Muslim. Or 2, they must pay tribute and more, be reduced to slavery, and which is an actual accurate account. A lot of scholars will argue and say, oh, the dhimmi pays tribute, jizya, but he's left alone and he's free. No, he is sort of reduced to slavery because he's at the whim and call of the Islamic society. Okay, and you see this till this day. Okay, the dhimmi, the non-Muslim who lives amongst Muslims. Yeah, at any moment, they may flare up and attack and kill you, and nobody's going to care, and the state's going to look the other way. All right. And then Manuel continues, or in the absence of whether in the absence of the non-Muslim becoming a Muslim or paying tribute, 3, he must be struck with iron without hesitation. Okay, so this is Emperor Manuel's take on jihad and jizya. This is his take on Quran 929. All right. And what was always interesting, and a few people miss this about jizya, and good for Emperor Emmanuel, but he pointed out and he said, what kind of God is this? So the supreme being, he doesn't want you to follow a false religion like Christianity and Judaism. Okay, he wants you to become a Muslim. But if you pay money, it's okay. You can be a sinner. You can follow the misguided teachings of Christianity and Judaism. I mean, does that really sound like a supreme being's thinking, or a very mortal human being who's more concerned about making money? So that was one of his Manuel's takes, which I think is very interesting. And actually, I lied when I said that's the last one. I'm going to give you a really good one now. Now, if you recall, I mentioned Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and they met with Barbary pirates, tried to negotiate the freedom of American sailors, and they were told, sorry, Quran 9:5. Now, his own son, who became the 6th president, John Adams' son, which is John Quincy Adams, 6th president of the United States, he actually closely studied the Quran and Muhammad's life, and he concluded the following. Quote, he wrote, adopting from the new revelation of Jesus Christ the faith and hope of immortal life and a future retribution, he, Muhammad, humbled it to the dust by adapting all the rewards and sanctions of his religion to the gratification of the sexual passion. He poisoned the sources of human felicity at the fountain by degrading the condition of the female sex and the allowance of polygamy. And he declared undistinguishing and exterminating warfare as part of his religion against all the rest of mankind. The essence of his doctrine was violence and lust, to exalt the brutal over the spiritual part of human nature. Between these two religions, thus contrasted in their characters of Jesus and Muhammad, a war of 1,200 years has already waged. And of course, he wrote this in the 1800s. It's now 14 centuries or 1,400 years. Okay, so you can see a very unwavering view on Islam and what it means and what it portends and what it has in store for the infidel and so forth. And I'm finally going to close it with a final quote by the most recent person that I included, which is Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th president of the United States, and himself an accomplished student of history, and he died in 1919. And he wrote the following little excerpt, quote, "Christianity was saved in Europe solely because the peoples of Europe fought. If the peoples of Europe in the 7th and 8th centuries and on up to and including the 17th century had not possessed a military equality with and gradually a growing superiority over the Mohammedans who invaded Europe, Europe would at this moment be Mohammedan and the Christian religion would be exterminated. Wherever and whenever the Mohammedans have had complete sway, wherever and whenever the Christians have been unable to resist them by the sword, Christianity has ultimately disappeared." All right. Okay, so that was a quick tour de force of Islam as we try to understand if Islamophobia is a thing. Now we've seen what the doctrines of Islam is that should concern the infidel, and I already highlighted the main one for this particular live stream, which would be jihad. We've seen it's an ironclad aspect of the Quran and of the Hadith, which are the twin pillars of Islam, the textual twin pillars of Islam. We've seen how the Muslims themselves understood it. We've seen how Western scholars and academics understood it before they became corrupt and politically correct and subverted and etc. By the quote I gave you from the Encyclopedia of Islam. And then we've seen how non-Muslims, especially Europeans, understood Islam historically and what they saw. Okay, and we saw the spread of Islam historically, which was in conformity to the violence preached, to the Quran verses, the sword verses, the go fight and give them three choices. That is exactly what happened from the time of Muhammad up until I stopped it with, of course, but it continued on till the present. But I stopped it with the Barbary Wars and Thomas Jefferson, once again being told a quote directly from the Quran, 9:5. And so it's a pretty ironclad thing. Well, what about the present? Is this still happening? Well, this is the part I'm not going to spend too much time on because I assume you're up to speed on the present. Yes, we still have Muslims. Okay, Muslim schools, Muslim institutions still teach this sort of thing. You might not know it, but I know it because I know Arabic, and I actually can go into these areas and sources, and I know exactly what's being taught, and it's the same thing. And of course, it would be the same thing because that is the religion. Okay, it's still being taught in Al-Azhar, the #1 most prestigious university in Cairo. All these books that I just read to you, I have so many Arabic books that are this one's approved by Al-Azhar itself, and it talks about the 4 jurisprudence schools, and it's the same exact thing. I was going to quote from it, but there's too many sources actually. And so it's being taught still, the hostility, the violence, the jihad, but it's also, remember, jihad is something you do when you can do. So it would be stupid and suicidal for Saudi Arabia or Egypt or anyone to declare jihad on the world, right? So you have to bide your time. This is the Mecca phase for them, the time to preach peace, and you have your religion and I have mine until circumstances change, right? And we see the violence. So all across the world, one of my themes that I follow, which I think is a litmus test to how Muslims act, is when you look at their countries and you find that the minorities, the religious minorities like Christians, are constantly being persecuted and killed and harassed and so forth. And if you know, I talk a lot about Muslim persecution of Christians. If you look at the World Watch list of the 50 worst offenders, something like 37 are always Islamic. Kind of interesting. Even though these Muslim nations have nothing else to do with each other, they're racially different from Africa, sub-Saharan Africans and Arabs and Persians and Turks and Central Asians and East Asians and Sinic peoples. Okay, very different cultures, languages, socioeconomic, political systems. And yet you see the same pattern of persecution of minorities. Why? Islam. Okay. And then, I mean, needless to say, you have the Islamic State, which I did a stream recently or a video where I gave you the quotes, and they quoted 9:5, Quran 9:5 and 9:29, and why you have to go fight and kill and slaughter the infidel, and it's part of our religion, etc., right? So it's definitely a real thing in the present. So there you go. The Quran and the Islamic scriptures, the Quran and Hadith, unequivocally teach violence and hatred and subjugation for the non-Muslim. History teaches that this is exactly what happened. What is today called the Islamic world, the overwhelming majority of it, if not all of it, is built atop land that was forcibly stolen and conquered from non-Muslims, mostly Christians, actually. Okay, and then so you have the spread, and then the people who lived back then, well, they saw the same exact thing. The people I just quoted to you, all of them saw and understood that this was a jihad, and that's how they just. I mean, they may not have used those words, but they understood that these people have a hostility for us. It's taught to them by their prophet and their false prophet and their false god and their false book. And this went on and this went on, both the jihad all the way. America's first war as a nation is with Muslims over this idea, the Barbary Wars. And every American, early Americans already were in the 20th century, and we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt, and you just saw that quote. Okay, so where is the Islamophobia in all this? Okay, Islamophobia, let us go back, is fear of Islam. I submit to you that fear of Islam is a very healthy and natural response to Islam in light of what we just discussed, which is reality, which is Islamic teaching, Islamic behavior in the past, Islamic behavior in the present. Of course, as a non-Muslim, one should have fear. That's very healthy. Okay. But they want you to think, and they're shutting you down by convincing you that this is an irrational fear. No, you're crazy. Muslims don't do that. You're just an evil Islamophobe. You're a horrible person. You're a racist, whatever. All those words, right? And we just saw, as I started off, you have someone, you got the Spanish priest who's now facing 3 years in jail. A Spanish priest, for crying out loud. Spain, the nation that spent 700-800 years fighting Muslims to kick him out. Now its government is putting a priest in jail because he just said what I said. He quoted the things that I'm quoting, which is Islamic teaching. That's the thing about Islam. You don't have to make anything up. All you have to do is quote it. It itself says what it says. No one has to make anything up. It's all right there, all the negative stuff. Okay, so yeah, that's the state of the affairs. Islamophobia is a healthy reaction. It is not an irrational fear. Okay, even though they want you to think that, and it's not all right. And noob. And it's just being weaponized. It's one of those words, many of which there are, which is because Muslims cannot win in the realm of debate. How are you going to debate what I've just told you, right? It's all documented. It's true. So the only response is to shut you down, okay, by creating one of these new words, right, that shut you down, put you in jail. Spain is, the Spanish example I gave you is one, but look at the UK. What a disgrace. I mean, people are going to jail for tweets and whatnot that are mild, that are essentially capturing what I'm saying, which is that Islam is inherently violent, etc., because it's all permeates all of their teachings, all of their doctrines, all of their scriptures, and all of their history, past and present. So there it is. Okay, let's take a few super chats. See what you all think. Rogue disciple. The term was weaponized by the Muslim Brotherhood to silence any criticism of Islam. In effect, it silences true victims of oppression and abuse. Yeah, there's not much more I can add to that. That's essentially what we've been saying, right? That's exactly it. But you know what? You say the Muslim Brotherhood, and I do agree. But it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood. It's just this current climate, the left. The left, um, which is also because it is an enemy of the truth, and it has its many allies, including Islam. It's the one that's really spearheading a lot of this Islamophobia and trying to, shut people down. Hi, Chris. Welcome. Coltrane, you should flex your Arabic a lot more. Let Muslims know you know. Let them know I know. Yeah. Well, I do know. I enjoy speaking Arabic when I travel about with Muslims, not under my real name. And, I'm taking for a normal, regular Arab Muslim. Interesting fact, Muhammad's first cousin, Ubaydullah ibn Jahsh, left to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and became Christian and apostate after our own hearts. Yeah, a lot of them did, actually. And, I read to you the quote from the Doctrine Jacobi, which, of course, is important because it's very early and it's a non-Muslim source. But even Islam's own story, right, the Quraysh of Mecca, between the lines, they're mocking him and attacking him because he's a false prophet who's making things up. So even in the Islamic tradition, of course, Muslims read it as, oh, they weren't, it's because they were blinded to the light. They didn't see the truth about Islam. But even there, it comes out. Andrew, how many of the Islamic scholars that it is claimed pioneered the sciences, mathematics, etc., were converts through conquest and of European education? Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people, when you hear the golden age of Islam and etc., a lot of those, the people who actually did the good stuff were not even, they either were not Muslims, they were Jews and Christians or Zoroastrians, especially in Baghdad under the Abbasids, because that was Iranian. Or they were first or second generation sort of nominal converts who just converted because, well, that's what you got to do if you don't want to get molested under Islam. But they still had a sort of worldview and epistemology guided by their former religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. So for all intents and purposes, they weren't really Muslim, even though their name is Muhammad and Abdul. Okay, this is actually a very important topic, which I mean to cover at some point and elaborate on. Founding fathers, when Christians reconquered, as in Spain and Sicily, how and why were they successful? Is there relevance for the present? Well, they were successful because they just fought tooth and nail with violence, extreme violence. And, but it's hard for me to even say there's a correlation because also they didn't allow Muslims into their country. So this was at a time when Islam was much more powerful. Okay. And Christians wanted nothing to do with it. And Islam came and Islam came by force and conquered. Okay. So it's really not very similar to today because today Islam's not coming in by force. It's being brought in. So fighting will make you the bad guy and your government's going to arrest you. It really comes down to your governments. They are bringing them in. Other countries don't have this problem. They just they don't have to go to war with Muslims and just say, no, we're not interested. Problem solved, right? So I wouldn't say there's much of a correlation or analogy really between now and then. It's actually much easier now. Back then, they had no choice. Like I said, strong Muslims, stronger than them, were invading and conquering. All you could do is fight back. Today, this is not the case. Muslims are not invading. They're being welcomed and brought in and empowered. And the actual natives of, let's say, the UK are being suppressed and attacked and jailed. That's the real problem. So in this case, the problem is really less the Muslims and more their enablers. And I think it's very important for people not to lose track of that, because then you're going to look at the wrong source you're going to think the root source is Islam itself. In this, okay, Islam itself is an inherent innate problem. Okay, but in this case, in Europe, for example, it's not. It's being made a problem. Okay, it was an innate problem when Europe was weak and Islam could enter through force. Now that's a very different thing. Carlos, congrats on your relatable video today. Keep it up. Well, thank you. Carlos, again, the younger generation of Christian men are now pushing gym culture, including the lead pastor of my church. It seems dumb, but I think it's important we bring back masculinity. Thanks, Raymond. Yeah, I definitely think bringing masculinity is very important to Christianity. But to be honest with you, and despite my muscle-bound appearance, I don't think you have to lift weights to be masculine. I don't think that's a prerequisite. That's just something I do for various reasons because it's what I've been doing for so long, and I just enjoy it. But you can be. I think you can. Masculinity is important, and it can be brought about by doing a number of masculine things. I do believe physical activity is great, not necessarily weightlifting. It could be anything, but definitely getting out and doing some form of even being a farmer is very good. Flippy, what do you think of Muslims who speak out against mass Islamic migration, like Zia Yusuf in UK and Imam Tawhidi in Australia? Well, if they're speaking out against mass Islamic immigration, that's good. They're saying the right thing. It doesn't matter what their religious identity is. Of course, it raises questions. I'm sure they're seen as traitors by their co-religionists, but in this case, it makes sense. They're saying and doing the right thing, which would benefit the host country, like Australia, for example. Flippy, have you heard of Andrew Boston? Yes, I know him. He had a great interview on Winston Marshall podcast. If you heard of him, what is your opinion of him? Well, I like him. I've known him for, first time I met him, I want to say like 18 years ago. We've been in touch, sporadically since then by email, but he wrote a really good book, The Legacy of Islamic Jihad, which I like because it's a huge, thick book, and it really brings in a lot of what we're talking about, the doctrines of Islam, the most dangerous ones, the history, like excerpts of historical, the exegesis and so forth. So that's definitely a good book that he wrote, The Legacy of Jihad, I believe it's called. Pelagius, looking forward to the Swords of Christ, 2 Swords of Christ. Yeah, me too. I still haven't gotten my copies. It's still being born. The book is done, but I'm still waiting for it to, manifest in the flesh, as it were. Hi, Quinn. Welcome aboard. Given what this religion is, erasing it would be self-defense. Yeah, look, it's and that's one of the problems when you call it a religion, which we all do, of course. That's the problem. It gets to hide. Is Nazism a religion? Is Nazism given freedoms and allowed to? Can a person be a Nazi? Well, no. But what is it? It's an ideology. It's a supremacist ideology. Well, what is Islam? Well, once you dig in, it's a supremacist ideology that calls for violence and warfare and bloodshed against the other, not necessarily based on their race, but on their religion. So, you get what you get. And it's a matter of you have to stop seeing it as a religion. And this is one of the issues, I think. Hello, Raymond. I love your work. What do you think about Crusader conquest of Mahara? Yeah, is this where they engage in a little bit of cannibalism and they ate the buttocks of Muslims? Yeah, I don't think much of it. It's just I think it's an example of desperation and extreme warfare when you're away from your supplies and you're starving to death and eating the stuff the Crusaders would eat during the First Crusade and drink their horses' blood and eat leather and eat rats. Yeah, it makes sense that they ended up eating dead Muslims or portions of them. It's called, extreme duress and human nature and trying to get sustenance one way or the other. Not exactly a good thing, but a lot of people have been known to do it. People in planes that crash in the modern era end up doing it. What are your thoughts on low birth rates in Western nations? If they defeat Islam, they still need to have babies, or they will die out. Well, yeah, I mean, they're both. What you're saying is connected and not connected. I mean, low birth rate is just indicative of a dying culture, dying people, and it's doubly bad when you have another hostile force entering your lands with a very high birth rate, right? And that's what's happening right now. So it's a double whammy. Please discuss that incident when Muhammad was fleeing and Ali was nearly killed in his place. I think that at Mo's request, Ali was disguised. Yeah, okay. I'm vaguely familiar, but not comfortable enough to pronounce anything on this because I might get it wrong. So maybe next time. Sorry. John, recently picked up your books and I've been learning so much I never knew before. Thank you for your bravery and honor to you. God bless. Thanks very much, John. Very happy to hear that. Basileos, the king. How much of what is said about the Muslim Brotherhood being behind the ongoing invasion of Europe is real, and how much is conspiracy theory? Keep up the good work. Uh, the problem I have with these terms, Muslim Brotherhood, is I like to think in kind of on a bigger level. When you say Muslim Brotherhood or Al Qaeda or ISIS, what happens is people think that the problem is rooted to an organization or an institution or a person or an individual or in a group. And it's not. The problem really is transcends all of this. The problem, as I just showed you, is in the teachings of the religion itself, in the Quran, okay, in the words of the Muhammad. And it manifests itself historically, and in the present, it manifests itself through these organizations, including the Muslim Brotherhood. So my point is, if the Muslim Brotherhood were to just completely disappear tomorrow, not much would change. Okay, I remember, when Osama bin Laden died, Peter Bergen and CNN and Fareed Zakaria wrote about it, and they just like, oh my, it was a celebration, and they literally said the war on terror is over. It's over. And it's kind of like, what? Because you got one guy, you think that this is it, it's going to end. And of course it didn't. It got worse. Then we got ISIS. I likened it a long, long time ago to, Hercules fighting the Hydra monster, where he cuts off a head, two more pop up. It's like that. So when we get caught up with whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or ISIS or this, we start really, the problem is we start focusing on symptoms, not the root cause. Muslim Brotherhood is a symptom. The root cause is Islam. And that's why, so when you say, is the Muslim Brotherhood behind what's happening, the ongoing invasion of Europe? Well, I think Muslims, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or other Muslims are, but in the end, really, the buck stops with the politicians. So, this is a very important point. Whenever you hear these different theories, and, they may be legit, but the good thing about our system is we know where the buck stops. It stops with the politicians. So whether they're paid or bought off or corrupted or whatever, it's them who make policy, politicians, right? They're the ones who need to be held accountable. So instead of, it's fair enough to worry about what's happening behind the scenes. I agree. But the good part of our system is it doesn't, in a way, you don't need to know, because who cares why my politician, whether he was bribed or whether he was blackmailed. The fact is, he's the one that should do the right thing because he's an elected official representing me. So when he doesn't, why he did it is one thing, but he needs to be held accountable because he's the one who is doing the bad thing. In this case, for example, bringing in Muslim migrants. Eric, what did the West's past possess that its present does not? The answer is men who had something worth fighting for. Raymond Ibrahim. Ah, that's a quote for me. I thought it sounded familiar. I think I wrote that in Defenders of the West. Yeah, and I still agree with it. Luke, have you heard the news of Pope Leo providing prayer rooms for Muslims inside the Vatican? Yes, I did. King Charles did the same when he allowed Muslims to celebrate Eid at the St. George's Chapel in the UK. Yeah. What can I say? Right? What I mean, I try to envision, you know, I'll try to envision like the former popes, Archbishop Rodrigo, who I read to you. I mean, it used to be historically, it was the popes who were the most militant against Islam, not just by calling crusades, but just the ones who really called it out. And now you have a pope who's accommodating Muslims praying to a false deity. Okay. I'll leave it at that. I'll fight you naked. I'm good. Why do people blame foreign policy for Islamism? Hmm. Well, I mean, the only thing I can say is what I sort of just said, which is uh, if you're talking about a Western nation, right? Islam or Islamism, if you prefer, is a problem only because Western politicians and leaders are making it or allowing it to be a problem. I mean, that's obviously true. The abolitionist. Should a female polemics presenter wear revealing attire? A female polemicist against Islam wear revealing attire? Yeah, I suppose if you want to be provocative unnecessarily, but it might be better to make your polemic more intellectual. That might actually be more effective on a Muslim. Flippy. The left is the most dangerous weapon Muslims have. Yep, sure it is. The left. How I hate that word. And yet I have to use it because what else am I going to say? We're going to have to work together and coin a new word about this left business. The Xenomorpho Warrior. Hey, brother, would you ever consider making a historical video on the Teutonic Order to clear up historical inaccuracies? I find that they're heavily smeared for cultural or political reasons. Yeah, I mean, one thing that can't be denied is that they were used to Christianize a lot of the Baltic regions. And so a lot of people, here's the thing: there's like a handful of instances we know of where Christians use force to Christianize pagans. Okay, and that's one of them: the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic regions, Estonia, Lithuania, etc. And another famous one is Charlemagne's wars against the Germanic peoples. And again, they're very limited, but people just harp on them all the time, as if they're just And again, if you understand them in the context, of course, Hollywood always shows you any movie you watch that deals with these themes. The pagans are always these nice, open-minded people. They're like modern day pagans, right? And they just want to be friends. But then the crazy, evil Christians come with their crosses and, no, we're going to force you to become a Christian and burn you down, and we're evil. Well, the reality was a little different. It was the pagans who were engaged in a lot of really disgusting violence and extreme, like sadistic stuff against their Christian neighbors. And in this era, you couldn't say, hey, stop being a Nazi and be a secularist, as an example. The only way to stop being a pagan was to be a Christian. You couldn't be an atheist, is what I mean. Okay. So a lot of the Christianizing that you saw was because we're trying to stop these people from being total savages who are killing other Christians. And the only way that can be done the only way they can stop being pagans is they have to believe in something else, which is Christianity. Okay. And that's not necessarily, I'm not trying to justify this. I'm just trying to tell you that is the part that's always missing that they don't tell you. That's the context, which I think makes it a lot more palatable and understandable that Christians did act that way. All right. Crazy Ivan. Hi, Raymond. I greatly enjoy your content and have your works on my wish list. Sword and Scimitars first. What is your response to the critics who say you only offer biased, one-sided history? Okay, prove it. I mean, I don't know what that means. One-sided history. My books usually have something like 1,000 endnotes, And so, okay, the thing is, the funny thing is, I don't see many critics of my books, and I'd look forward to seeing it. And I think because there's not much that you can say, the best approach is to ignore it and pretend it's not out there. All right. But if I see an actual criticism, I think it will be easy to debunk it. The kind of criticism I see is what I'm talking about, which is, oh, he's an Islamophobe. Don't read his book. That's the limitation of what I generally see. When I was invited to give a talk at the U.S. Army War College, for example, that's what CARE and their leftist allies did. They didn't grab it was about my book. It was about Sword and Scimitar. That was in the title. And they wrote letters and they said, oh, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't once show one passage from my book and say, oh, look, that's a lie. He's misrepresenting history. It was just ad hominem. I'm an Islamophobe, which is, of course, why I'm doing this particular video or live stream right now, to address the whole topic of Islamophobia. Vic, radical pedagogists. Okay. Instead of the left, calling them woke tards. Yeah, if you saw my video, there's so much of it's very important to use an appropriate word is what I'm trying to say. When we say left, you might have seen my video. We're just legitimizing them. We're saying they belong on the spectrum. But a lot of the stuff they believe in just is not worth legitimizing. It's not worth debating. Some dude comes up and tells me I'm a woman, or vice versa. A woman says I'm a man. This is not a political position. This is, like I said before, you either need a priest or you need a psychiatrist. But you don't need to be part of the political debate. Nerd. Have you seen God Logic's wife and other Christian women debate Muslim women? I confess ignorance. I don't know who you're talking about. But it sounds maybe interesting, and I'll look it up at some point. All right. I think that is it. I think this is a new record. My longest live stream. My goodness, almost 2 hours. Hey, I'm getting better at this stuff. All right. Well, there it is. So now you've learned that Islamophobia is a big fat lie. Well, no, it's true. We need more of it. It's healthy. It's natural. It's to be expected. Islam has earned it. Fear of Islam. If I'm a non-Muslim, it makes absolutely perfect sense that I would fear Islam. Okay. And the reason that it's being used as a cudgel, of course, is because we live in this sort of therapeutic society where any negative word is considered triggering, and we have to not speak or say anything, and we have to be doormats, as I often say. That's just a lie. That's a ruse to get you to shut up. And it's getting worse and worse, as we've seen from Spain to the UK. People are now going to jail for it. So it's time to wake up, because this could very easily come here. If you're by here I mean America. Let no American be deluded and think, oh yeah, it's just those dumb Europeans. We're not like that. No, it's on its way here. Okay, America has already been very much degraded when it comes to free speech. So this next step, just remember, Europe is always more progressive. It's more ahead of us. So it only makes sense that they're there at that point. But we are totally on that trajectory. Make no mistake of it. So hopefully we stop and we understand what Islamophobia really is. It's a very healthy, natural fear. It's not something that should be used to shut up or shame people, even though it will be, because the totality of Islam, from its core books to its history to its present, and from what everyone has seen, past and present, is to be feared if you're a non-Muslim. All right, my friends, with that, I will bid you adieu on this fine Friday, and I'll see you again on another stream. Take care. Bye.